Hello, I'm Mark McClain, founder and CEO here at SailPoint, and welcome to our podcast, Identity Matters, where I get the opportunity to interview security experts, business leaders, and just generally people who are humble, hungry, and smart. Today, I am very excited to welcome a long-term colleague and friend, Kevin Cunningham. Kevin's a co-founder here at SailPoint, where he served as the president for 13 years before taking some retirement. Prior to that, he and I were co-founders with a bunch of other good buds at a place called WaveSet, which was our first identity company. And we even go back before that to Tivoli here in Austin. So this is the year Kevin and I figured out we have known each other for 30 years. We were very young when we started. So Kevin, thanks for joining us on the podcast today. Really excited about this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. It's great to be here. Thanks. And congrats on that super IPO.
We are pretty excited about the next phase of the journey. So on we go.
Great.
Well, Kevin, let's get started with you and I go back. We just figured out about 30 years. We were at Tivoli together after an interesting journey there. Teenagers at the time, as far as everyone knows. We started a company together called WaveSet, and that led to SailPoint. But tell a little of that, how we kind of evolved into these founders and the space we chose. There's some fun story here.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think we really knew what we were doing.
That's a little too honest, Kevin. Let's try that again.
Well, I mean, we were working at Tivoli, which was a division of IBM at the time. Pretty big, organization. And this is 1999, and this is before the dot-com bust. So everybody and their brother was starting companies. Furniture.com, Garden.com, and we kind of looked around and said, well, why don't we do something like that? We weren't sure quite what it was we wanted to do, as you recall. But we said we want to do something. Yeah. Why not? The opportunity is here in the marketplace. So we're smart guys. Let's start something else.
How hard can it be?
So we went into this brainstorming mode where we used a whiteboard, and every week somebody would come up with a different idea, present it to the team, and we said, there's no bad ideas. Let's brainstorming now, get these ideas out. I think we came up with about 10 different concepts, and I think we were all a little bit tired of selling to IT and security. So we were trying to get something that was refreshing and new and different. And we took the top 3 of those ideas to a potential funder, and they looked at us and looked at our ideas and said, you guys, these might be good ideas, but not for you. You need to find something that leverages your experience, your knowledge. We're like, okay. So we went to your point earlier about listening to the marketplace. Yeah. We went and started doing a bunch of cold calls. We would call into organizations and ask specific questions about what was working well for them, what wasn't working well. It was a very painful experience, as you recall. I have a new respect for people who do cold calls for a living because it can be quite demoralizing. But when you got somebody on the phone that was willing to talk to you, it was like gold because they would talk and talk and talk. They knew you weren't selling anything, so it would really open up to what their real problems were, which led to our conclusion that, hey, this area of provisioning is underserved in the marketplace. And it's a big need for companies, and they'd be willing to pay for it. So that was the start of the company. Yep. I think we started off with hiring one engineer, Dan Smith, as I recall. We were officing in the Regis.
The egregious Regis.
We had just moved from Mike Turner's garage apartment to the Regis. So we're more efficient
Big
now.
upgrade.
But I think that it was a market well suited for us. So the investor was right in this case, right? That we were better off sticking to our knitting, but use that knowledge and experience to take it to the next level.
100%. Yeah, I've often told some folks that are really young that want to do companies, I'm like, look, there's some great success stories of guys in their early 20s, guys and gals in their early 20s. But I'm like, sometimes the better likelihood of success is go work for 10 plus years and learn some stuff. Because I think if we had not had a lot of the experience we'd had being in an IT company at scale, large-scale customers and their challenges, we had a lot of, I guess today they call it domain knowledge, right? We had some intrinsic domain knowledge of what it took to succeed with a product and a company in that area. Again, we had this hilarious, one more rabbit trail for all of you, a little Christmas gathering of some of our early couples in the company, and we faked some of the partners and spouses into the idea that we were going to do a new, really great idea, smell on the internet. We were going to have this thing where you have a little device by your computer, and when a rose showed up, it would smell like a rose. And when food showed up, it smelled like food. We had no idea the technology how to make that happen. But we weren't serious, by the way. But we freaked out a few spouses because they thought, wait, you quit your jobs to do this? So not every idea, as Kevin said, is a good idea. You might want to stick to something you know, and that's actually a good idea that will pay for in the market.
And speaking of quitting our jobs, it's something that was taking a leap of faith. I think that's something that sometimes people are a little queasy about. Right? I'm going to leave my full-time paying job. I think we have between us, 8 kids, 9 kids between us. Not just between you and I, but between
all the founders at that time.
And I think that was advice we got from one of the investors as well. It's like, hey, if you guys are serious about this,
jump in.
You got to jump in. You got to dedicate full time to this. Otherwise, it's going to be a hobby at best. So we did. We took that leap of faith. We jumped. Now, at the time, I didn't feel like it was that great a risk because I think all of us could have gone back and gotten our old jobs. I think that's what I tell people too. It's like, your old company, if you're good, they're going to hire you back. So it's a risk, but it's not a leap off the bridge risk, right? So, but it was important because it gave us that time and focus to come up with the concept for our WaveSet.
Yeah, we had to dive in deep and give it full time. And yeah, you're right. I've seen a lot of folks who kind of think they're dabbling on the edge and they never get to it because they're just not able to give it the time and focus. Yeah, a lot of great lessons. Boy, we've talked a little bit about, kind of how things got started, but why don't you just share a little bit with our folks? Some folks have known you from your past long career in identity and security, kind of a little bit about what you've been up to. Yeah,
I think since I left SailPoint, I had a design goal, a model of the life I wanted to lead post SailPoint, which is kind of divided in thirds. I want to spend 1/3 of my time helping humanity in some way, shape, or form. I want to spend 1/3 of my time helping other entrepreneurs get their start in starting companies. And then I want to spend 1/3 of my time just enjoying life and traveling and going to places I've never been before. So I'm not exactly at the 1/3 level, but I am working with about half a dozen companies now, early stage startups, first-time entrepreneurs in many cases. I find that really enjoyable. It's not always easy, as you know. We've been there ourselves, but I do find it enjoyable. And believe it or not, sometimes they listen to me. Not always, but sometimes.
The smart ones do.
I'm pretty actively involved with Habitat for Humanity. I'm on the board there, very active in terms of trying to help our community. I mean, I always look at it as Austin has been really great for high tech, but high tech has had an implication and impact on Austin, right? We have a lot of high-paying jobs in the community. Therefore, we're partly responsible for the crisis we have with affordable housing. So I feel really have an obligation to go and help solve that problem for those working people. I mean, these are teachers, nurses, first responders who are being priced out of the Austin market. So I think it's a really great cause. I know SailPoint has been a very great supporter, as you have personally, Mark. So I really appreciate the support. And travel, I'm doing pretty good at. My wife is from Australia, so we get back there at least a couple times a year, but been traveling to lots of other places too, enjoying it. So
that 1/3 I know got a little bit derailed during COVID.
It went almost to zero during
almost
COVID,
to zero,
right?
but it's kind of back on track. The traveling is back.
Right.
Well, that's actually a fun segue to kind of culture. And we're talking about kind of how you approach life in some ways. When you and I were two of the 4 co-founders at this company, or 3 at this company, 4 at the last company. Some of you may not know this. Kevin and I co-founded 2 companies. WaveSet, which was like an 00 to 05 journey, sold to Sun, and then SailPoint, which we were both at for many years. We used to spend time kind of intentionally talking about how important it was to build great technology, because that's how we were going to win in the market, but also about what it took to build a great culture. What are some of your memories of kind of how we approached some of those cultural topics in the early days?
Gosh, I think we were very intentional about it. At the very start of the company, before we had employee number 1, we came up with our values, the 4 I values. And we put a lot of thought into that. I think you in particular put a lot of thought into that. And we really sought to live those values, not just words on a paper, but live the values, right? And so we try to demonstrate to our team those values as on a daily basis if we could. We rewarded people who also demonstrated that through our Compass Award every quarter. And I think that it becomes so critically important. I mean, there's an old saying that culture eats strategy any day of the week, right? Culture is a thing that gives you lasting power, right? I remember back in 2008, bad time to be in business for anybody during the global financial crisis. And we were under a lot of pressure from our board to cut costs. There was a famous Sequoia PowerPoint that went around. And basically the gist of the PowerPoint message was, this is worse than anyone thinks. It's going to last a long time. have your companies cut and cut way deeper than they think they cut. But culturally, that kind of went against Mark and my philosophy about people, right? Individuals are people. These are families that are working for us. So we just didn't feel that was the right thing to do. We also saw that there was still plenty of market opportunity ahead of us, and we felt strongly that cutting back was the wrong thing to do. So what we did instead was we took pay cuts across the board. Now, if we didn't have a strong culture, if we didn't have honor for our individuals, right, and who didn't want to necessarily be there and wanted to go look for other places, we might not have survived that winter. So I really do think that culture comes into play not just in terms of being able to provide exceptional performance, but also gets you through the really tough times that we're all going to face as entrepreneurs.
One of my favorite stories about how you and I approached culture, and we kind of had this value of humility. It wasn't one of the 4 I's, but it was kind of embedded in a lot of our approach, and just kind of not getting too big for your britches or all about yourself. And our best demonstration of that was sharing an office for 10 years. Early on, that was a small, crappy office, to be really clear. And it would send such a signal to people. Sometimes we'd hire someone who would come from somewhere big. They said, well, I'm gonna want a window or office with a little more space. And we say, why don't you come visit our office? Yeah. And that sort of took the wind out of their sails pretty quickly on what they needed, because we were all about, look, the company is what matters. We're going to do our best to, but you having all these, accoutrements or whatever, the fancy stuff wasn't how we built the company. It was like, we're going to kind of get used to have this great analogy of getting in the lifeboat together.
Right.
That's another great story you can tell for a second.
As a startup, you're all in a lifeboat, right? And you all better be rowing in the same direction, because this is survival. And so that's again part of the culture, is working together well as a team and respecting each other. I still get comments from people who say, I can't believe you and Mark shared an office all those years. Like, yeah, we did. It was great. Not only because it was showing the company a good example of, hey, we're all going to be kind of in the same boat here. We're asking you to share an office, so we're going to share an office, of course. But because it kept us better in touch,
100%.
Right? There would be times Mark would be in a conversation on the phone, and I would hear something, or vice versa, and we said, let's talk about that. It just really kept us stay really in tune.
Yes.
As leaders of the company.
I think at that point, to have to go back in history, I don't think either of us were a parent of a teenager yet, but anybody who has parented teenagers, much less younger kid, learns that whole don't let mom and dad get split thing by the kids. Boy, you know what? Same is true at work. When we were always aligned, then people couldn't say, well, I went to Kevin and he said it was okay, and nobody had talked to me or vice versa. We stayed highly aligned, and that kept the company on a consistent, and just like moms and dads, every so often, we probably didn't see 100% aligned. We seen like 95% of stuff aligned, but every so often, and we just go talk about it in our little office by ourselves. Right. And then we'd come back out and kind of have a unified view. I think I just set a real strong trajectory, for the business and how we approach things.
But Mark, I'm convinced that those times when we had to have a discussion about things, oftentimes we just said, yeah, that's fine. No brainer. Yeah. When we had the discussion, I'm convinced that 99% of the time we came out with a better answer than either one of us would have independently.
Yes. I don't know if this is a quote. I've used it as a quote. I don't know who to attribute to. I say none of us is as good as all of us. There's just the group wisdom is always going to beat any one person's, right? And you're always going to refine each other's ideas. I remember so many times we would throw stuff around and bat it around. And by the end, you'd have a good answer. And nobody can even remember who had contributed which parts of that answer to get to a really good answer. That was just a common thing for us, and in a room with a whiteboard and getting things down and all that stuff. I love that you're spending so much time now with younger entrepreneurs. If you think about some of the key leadership lessons you learned in our journey, what are some of the, you think, okay, I'm with a new entrepreneur or an early stage company builder. These are the 2 to 3 lessons I really want them to get. What are some of the things you feel like you want to imbue to those new leaders?
I look for a couple of things before I decide to help out a company. I look for something in particular with the CEO in terms of what's their attitude? Why are they doing this? Are they in it just to make a quick buck, or they have a passion and a vision for something that's going to be greater than the sum of the parts? So that's criteria number 1. But do they have the capacity to endure hardships? That's one thing I tell them all the time is you're going to run into hardships, many times unexpected. And it's those that are resilient and don't give up that are going to survive the storm, right? Because it's easy to get disheartened and realize it's going to happen. Just be prepared for it. But like the captain of ship, I have this great image I used during one of my talks I think an internal talk, one of our culture talks, about leading in the face of adversity. And if you haven't read Shackleton's book about that, it's incredible, about his adventures on the South Pole with the his wooden boat was stranded in the ice for a year.
Crazy story.
And talk about leadership there.
Yep.
I mean, these people could have gone crazy. But I tell them, expect adversity, and you as the captain of the boat have to demonstrate calm.
Yep.
You cannot panic. I have this image of a guy steering a boat, right? It's a racing boat. It's well heeled over.
Oh.
And you could tell they just took on a big wave. And the crew is all looking back at the captain, looking to see how he's reacting. He's at the helm, calm,
nice.
and steady, just unblinking, just staring right at it. That gave the crew, in many cases, the company, the calmness. I remember, Mark, again, back in 2008, when we were kind of really worried about the economy and the company had some nervousness about it itself. And you gave a great talk about, remember this, the bison in the snow?
Yes.
It was so inspirational. Mark brought up this story that, most animals run from a coming blizzard, right? They see the clouds, they see the snow, they run the other way. But the bison puts his head down and walks straight into it. And tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but the bison walks straight into it because they know by walking straight into it, they'll get out of it sooner.
Yep.
Versus running away from it.
Run through it, right?
Run through it. And that was the advice you gave the company. I think it was still a very memorable moment.
I have people who are still with the company, whatever that's been, 16, 17 years later, who I remember the bison story. And I always say, I didn't invent it. I just used it at the perfect time. So that's half the time in culture, right? Yeah. That's the game is you don't often come up with stuff totally out of thin air. I feel like a few times we came up with some great little phrases and such, but more of it is having this library almost of things are great leadership principles, and then kind of it's the time for people to do that. And like you say, sometimes things are going great. You want them to stay focused and not get lazy or complacent. Sometimes they're not going well.
Right.
Angela Duckworth hadn't written grit when we started the company, but boy, you just hit it right. There's going to be tough times no matter what.
It's almost like keep that even keel.
100%.
Right? Don't go too overboard when things are going too well because something else is going to come, and don't get too down when they're not going
when they're not great,
because they will get better.
By the way, I have to give, some of you know this, but I've often in new employee meetings and just people talking about the company, where'd the name come from? And I say, well, look, the true sailor was Kevin. Now, Kevin's not with us anymore. As you can hear by Kevin making all the nautical references, that's the sailing metaphor. No, it's a beautiful thing because Kevin was like a legit sailor, raced boats and all that stuff. And me, I'm happy to be on the crew, holding a line, which is like a rope but different. But at the end of the day, we had a great partnership for a long time, and still great friends after 2 companies. And we were just talking. It's 2025, so 30 years ago.
30 years, right?
We were youngsters, and we did some fun stuff. Well, let's talk about. We talked a little about leadership lessons, and actually one other thing is you think back to SailPoint. Maybe a couple thoughts. Maybe what was one of your favorite memories that you felt like was a pivotal moment where you talked about getting through that tough time in 08. Boy, that was significant. But maybe hey, we made some decisions or made some right calls that really paid off in the long run. Anything come to mind of business decisions or even people?
I think one of the big turning points is when we decided to go into provisioning.
Yeah.
When we started to complement our governance solution with provisioning and kind of coined the term identity governance at that point in time.
Yep.
That was a turning point for the company and the market, for that matter, right? Because once we did that, we got some of the analysts were telling us, "Oh no, you're biting off too much. You shouldn't do that." But we felt we could do it, and we kind of put their advice to the side for the moment, and we proved that we were right. Right? Yeah. It was the right move for the company at the time. I think that really set us on a different trajectory after that.
I think the other big one, give you and our former other co-founder out there, Jackie Gilbert. Hi, Jackie, out there. The decision to get into SaaS. We had intentionally not gotten into SaaS when we founded the company. Like I say to people, it was 05, 06. We did what we always talk about. We interviewed the market. We asked them what they wanted. And we heard loud and clear, if you build SaaS, we won't buy it. So we didn't build a SaaS solution. That was a smart move for us in 06. But by 13, 14, right, the world had shifted. And we sort of dove into that SaaS offering and kind of I always describe to people for another industry metaphor, it's like PeopleSoft had never been sold to Oracle. They were still independent, and they birthed Workday within the company. That's a metaphor people can understand. Workday was this modern SaaS version of PeopleSoft. But by then, those founders had left and started a new company. We got to do that inside one company. Which little trickier.
Yeah, a lot of challenges with that, right? Because we're still selling, because they're working on and selling the on-prem version. At the same time, we're introducing a potential competitive product as a SaaS version. So there are a lot of very tricky channels we had to navigate there.
We did. Yeah, back to other great things to refer people to. You've probably heard of or read Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma. To my mind, we weren't smart enough to realize that's what we're doing, I guess. Maybe we were, but that's exactly what he talks about in that book is when you're a leader, you've got to be willing to sow the seeds of the next generation product that might actually hurt you because if you don't, someone else will. Right. And we made that tough call, and it was challenging.
It's a hard
along the way.
To turn, and there's a lot of companies that never made that turn.
Right? So yeah, exactly.
We used to say we should write a book about this.
We should. Well, when you think about kind of what's happening out in the landscape, there's a lot happening. I'm just curious, kind of even at a macro level, not in any details about the companies you're working with, but as you look at kind of the evolving landscape in security, kind of what are some of the key things? And I know you're mostly still involved with security companies, maybe not purely, but like if you see that landscape, a lot of our listeners are obviously in and around the security industry. We're all watching a lot of things. Just kind of any thoughts you'd kind of give to folks that are paying attention to the industry, maybe?
Yeah, security is one of those topics that will never fully be solved.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, it's a man versus man problem. So we can put up security measures and install all kinds of security software and follow different security procedures, but the bad guys are always going to be looking for ways around that. And the bad guys are much more organized than ever before. And we were talking organized crime, we're talking nation states, and very well funded. So it's one of those issues that will never be 100% solved. So as providers of security solutions, it's up to companies like SailPoint to continue to innovate, right? You cannot take your eye off the innovation button because sure enough, someone's going to figure out how to crack the code again and again and again, which is, from a company perspective, it's a great business to be in.
Yes.
It's a real struggle for customers, though, because they're constantly having to figure out what new barriers do I need to put up. So that's going to be an ongoing trend. I think that's also one of the reasons that security is so fragmented. Right? It's a very specialized science. Yeah. And people are there good at endpoint security, aren't necessarily good at identity management, right? So it's a very nuanced discipline that is going to require a lot of innovation, which creates cycles of, young companies popping up with great innovations, being absorbed into larger companies. Larger companies, this is not going to happen with SailPoint, I know, but it does happen with some other larger companies that I've been affiliated with, find it hard to innovate as you get larger and larger. So the innovation starts to come from young startups who are very nimble and fast to respond to changes in the environment. And they tend to go through a cycle, then they get absorbed, reconsolidated back in. I don't see that trend, either of those trends changing anytime soon. So I think, again, we've always talked about the real values that SailPoint provided its customers were customer service and innovation. Yeah. We promised we would out-innovate anyone in the marketplace, and we promised to deliver the highest extreme of customer service. And I think that's what you guys continue to do, as witnessed by your continued success. And I think it's going to be incumbent to keep doing that.
Yeah, and boy, you're so on it. We talk about that, Kevin, still to this day of we aren't going to be smart enough to think of every innovation that's needed. So we're big enough now we may acquire some of those innovations. And we have a few over the years. Yeah. And we've also innovated some stuff ourselves where we said this is the thing to do. I always point to your leadership of just kind of our product market fit dialogues around what should we be doing and how. One of the things I've come to saying, I don't think I said this in the early days, is the most sustainable long-term competitive advantage is listening better, right? Yeah. Like if you just highly attune to what's happening, you come in with a curiosity and a willingness to learn from your customers and analysts, everybody around the industry, there's a lot of things swirling all the time. I don't think there's anybody better on the planet than you at kind of gathering all of that, putting it in the cauldron, stirring it around and going, here's what we got to do. I used to describe that and Jackie too. I was part of that dialogue. Kevin and Jackie were sort of the wizards of kind of here's all the things swirling around. Here's where we got to go. Yeah, exactly. That cauldron turned out some nice soup in the long run for us. But I think at the end of the day, that, like you say, there's still that desire we have as an organization. And we're not unique here, but I think we are at kind of on the front edge of that with a lot of companies of really leaning in to innovate based on market needs, not just what we think is interesting tech.
Well, that's part of the culture now.
That is. It's deeply embedded. Yeah.
Once you embed that culture, it's hard to kill. Every company will have a culture, right?
Yes.
Either
Yes.
Either you decide what that's going to be and you craft it and nurture it, or it's going to happen to you.
100%.
Right. And so I think we were very deliberate on creating the culture that we wanted to have to make such a lasting company.
Yes. Yeah. Even the way you so intentional. I love this. I'd heard this obviously before today's podcast, but Kevin, as he was kind of leaving his full-time day job, as we used to call it, had this very intentional third. I'm like, that is really good. Someday when I get there, I'm going to probably copy something like that. And it's just an intentionality, right? It's a focused, like, here's where I want to go. Here's sort of my plan to get where I want to go at a macro level. And then you kind of fill in those details as you go. So super fun. I think, since you're doing so much of that, any other, we're probably talking to some set of company builders and early stage folks. We talked about kind of listening to the market for innovation. Again, as you think about advising them on how to define that culture, not accidentally, we used to talk about accidentally waking up and discovering your culture isn't always great. You might not like what you find if you're intentional. How do you advise folks to not necessarily copy the values we had, obviously, but come up with their own? When you're advising one of those CEOs, how do you help them think about kind of developing their cultural their tenets, their values? How do you think?
Well, I hope you don't mind. I do share our culture document.
Of course
with them
you do.
as sort of a starting point to say, here's what we used.
Yep.
Read it over.
Yep.
If you like parts of it, by all
Feel
means
free to
use
use
it.
it.
If you don't like it, if you want to change it, go ahead. But the key is making sure the culture is front and center, right? Once you decide on what those values you want to see exhibited by your company is, just make sure it's talked about a lot. And I think we talked about it at least weekly, maybe daily at our company, right? So you got to make it a living, breathing document, not just a piece of paper that sits in a drawer. That's the key. And I think it's kind of lost on some folks, especially who may be coming from more technical background, who are kind of in the mindset like, I've got really good technology. Nothing else really matters.
That's just going to win the day,
I keep
right?
telling them, no, it's not. The world's not going to beat a path to your door because you got a better mousetrap. So I think just trying to get them understanding. Now, some people readily absorb that and take it on board, or already have adopted that as their philosophy and the kind of company they want to build because they just have come to the conclusion already on their own. For others, it's more of an educational process. And when I start telling anecdotes about how culture comes into play and how it will help you be successful in the long run, they kind of get it. But I have to tell them, you have to live it. You got to remind it. You got to reward it when you see it. Reward it. Talk about it. So it's important to people see that we feel it's important. Yeah. Or else they won't think it's important.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember this. I was just discussing this with somebody not long ago. How you operationalize stuff like this. In the early days, the four of us at WaveSet, and this carried over, we had like 3 distinct meetings. I remember this, right? We would have Monday mornings was kind of a classic business, running the business operational dialogue. And on Friday afternoons, we had Friday demos where we'd see the latest tech and ask our team. But the one other meeting, I don't know that those are uncommon in a lot of tech companies. Running the business, what's happening with the tech. But the third meeting was the founders Mondays going to lunch at ski shores. Early on, it was a couple of other notable Austin hole in the walls that are not with us anymore. But we would literally go and talk about the culture. We had a standing meeting for the founders to talk about culture, how it was going, what was working, what wasn't. And I think, just in my own experience with a decent number of young companies myself, that was pretty rare. That was not a common thing.
And I think, kudos to you. You drove a lot of that. I might have a lot to do with the product, but you had a lot to do with the culture.
Yep.
I mean, you were really holding the mantle there.
Well, takes a team, takes a village, something like that. All right, well, listen, super fun. Gosh, you and I could talk all day. We know that. We used to hang out in an office and talk all day. We used to do that. Well, 2 thoughts that are fun questions I've asked a lot of my guests, Kevin. You're seasoned enough. This question makes sense. I've had some 30-somethings on here. This is a tougher question for them. But the old, what advice would you give to your younger self? You and I had younger selves.
Besides, don't do it. No, just kidding.
Run away. Run away.
No, I think far from that.
Far from that.
The advice I would give is, I think advice that we tried to live was you have to live a balanced life, 100%. Right? We've both seen a lot of marriages break up. We've seen a lot of people drive themselves into the ground by not having that balanced life, right? Yep. And I think early part of my career, I did not have a balanced life. I just was working all kinds of crazy hours, and my family probably took the brunt of that. So I would, the key piece of advice is make sure you maintain that balance 100%. Because a lot of the most important things in your life are outside your job. Yeah. That's probably the number one thing.
Yeah, you and I, part of the reason we worked so well together for so long was we shared that value. I've got a few phrases I didn't have back then I use for that. One of the things I'll say to people is you want to build a successful life, not just a successful business. You and I have known a lot of folks built really successful businesses. Their life isn't really something you would admire as much. And I think the other one we've adopted a lot here, Kevin, since the earlier days, because of the intensity and the nature of the business. We talk about life isn't, or the work isn't a marathon. It's high intensity interval training, like the sprint rest model, which, as you say, that's balance. Doesn't mean you find some perfect, I'm working, 52.3 hours a week and exercising 5.9 and sleeping, but it's like you're constantly rebalancing, right? That's reality. But that idea that there are intense times and then there are times when you have to take the rest to recharge your batteries. And if you don't, you won't have the energy
Right.
and the sustenance for that next intense
Absolutely.
time. And I think we really learned how to ask a lot of our teams and each other and push hard, but always kind of say, okay, let's celebrate, let's rest, let's enjoy what we've
Absolutely.
done. And
Yep.
that was really big. Okay, and then I'd like to just know kind of your brain is always working. You have a great brain. Are you reading
It is
interesting
today.
books? Yeah, today. It's early too. It could get worse. But are you reading interesting books, podcasts? You like just kind of if you're like, hey, these are interesting places I'm learning or growing. What are some things that come to your mind?
I feel like I'm always learning and growing through the companies I'm working with. As you said, not all of them are high tech and security.
Yep,
I'm working
right.
in some consumer packaged goods.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
working with a company that's working to electrify ferry systems, ferry boat systems.
Oh, my goodness.
So I'm
Okay.
learning all kinds of new, businesses
Yeah.
through my engagements there, which is quite interesting. On a personal level, the book I just finished reading is called Die with Zero. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it yet. It's on my
It's
list.
actually, I recommend it highly.
Yeah? Okay.
It's about a philosophy of saying, hey, when you die, taking a bunch of money, trying to take a bunch of money with you or leaving it after you're gone is really not optimal, right? If you want to give to charity, why wait till you're gone
Right.
to see the benefits that money might provide to charity? Why not give it to them while you're alive,
Perfect.
right? So the goal proposed by the book is you should try to die with zero money. And I'm trying to get there.
You don't want to die before the zero because that could be
That's
bad.
right. That's right. At the same time, I want to leave some legacy for the
Absolutely.
family
Right.
to be used for specific purposes. Right. Not just create a bunch of trust fund babies, but for education, for health care, for starting a business. Things that I think provide value to their lives.
Yep.
So I kind of taken that book to heart.
That's great.
And I'm trying to live it.
That's for you youngins out there. That's great advice too. Yeah, having a real sense of giving back and using what you've been blessed with to bless others. Turns out that's a really great thing. Yeah, it's fun to think about those ways we can kind of make a dent with some of the things we can do. And like you said, too much too early, it doesn't end well for a lot of people. So we're all trying to avoid that when we can. There's a lot of stories there that aren't pretty. Well, listen, we've bounced around a lot, which I kind of figured we might, because Kevin and I got a lot of history, business, culture, families, work, life after work, all that good stuff. So we're super grateful you were able to join us, buddy.
It's great to be here, Mark. Thank you.
Right on the heels of our second IPO, which
Yes,
was something
congratulations.
you and I could have never dreamed of when we
know.
started this company.
Well, didn't dream of the first one.
Yeah, we did dream of one. Two was definitely not on the radar. But no, it's been a crazy fun journey, and so blessed to have good friends and partners who are parts of all these journeys. We're still great friends with our WaveSet founders and our early stage folks at SailPoint. It's a joy to work with your friends. I can tell you that. When you like the people you work with, work's a lot more fun. So we're inspired by a lot of this wisdom, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch. We'll bring you back at some point and say, hey, what else have you learned? Thanks for joining us on another edition of Identity Matters, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks again.